So today I'm here to talk about sound design in film, which is why the title of this video is How Sound Became Snow, because to create the crunching sound snow has in film, sound artists often use sound instead. In this video I want to briefly go over the history of sound design in film, and then talk about how sound often feels forgotten despite how much it brings to a film. And then I want to cover what I think makes for good sound design and what makes for bad sound design in film by looking at a few examples. I want to talk about the history of sound in film because the way filmmakers would implement it is interesting, and I think it would be good to get on the same page before talking about how often it feels overlooked and how it can be inserted into a film correctly. Despite its title as the silent era of Hollywood, there was still plenty of noise during this era, but filmmakers just needed to get a bit more creative to use sound in their films. Live musicians, sound effects, artists in theatre pits, full orchestras would accompany screenings, and various objects were used to create live sound effects that matched the actions. And we still do this today, but we record it instead of making the sounds on location. For the first time ever, the audience could hear the actors speak, which completely changed how acting behaved. Now, it wasn't about what you looked like and how well you could move. Actors also needed to sound the part too, and the technical issue of actually recording the sounds without breaking continuity became an issue. One of the main advances of this era was the ability to record sound directly onto a film strip, using optical soundtracks. This allowed for the synchronization of dialogue, music, and sound effects, revolutionizing how films were produced and experienced. Another interesting development was the introduction of the boom microphone, which improved the quality of recorded sound and allowed for more dynamic mode of sound capturing. I'm not going to lie, the Hays Code sucked. Unless you were like 5 years old, your favorite movies most likely wouldn't be able to exist if the Hays Code was still in effect. However, this did force filmmakers to get more creative with sound in order to insinuate certain themes, without actually showing it, which allowed films to develop more uses for sound technology, with the art of Foley becoming widely used, which is actually the process of using things to make certain noises that I described at the start of the video. The fear of being blacklisted for communist affiliations led filmmakers to adopt a less innovative approach to filmmaking, including sound design. However, this period also witnessed the success of film noirs. This genre created the mood by using sound effects in innovative ways to create a tense atmosphere to enhance its dark, cynical themes and shadowy aesthetic. Soundscapes often included jazz scores, echoing footsteps, and distant sirens, which contributed to a sense of unease. The end of the studio system marked a turning point in filmmaking, including the evolution of sound design. Independent producers and directors seized the opportunity to push the boundaries of traditional filmmaking, to explore new techniques and storytelling methods. This time period saw an increase in on-location shooting, which presented both challenges and opportunities for sound design, playing a crucial role in enhancing the realism and immersion of cinema. This was due to improvements in sound recording technology, including developing and refining portable, high-quality recording equipment. The use of synchronized sound recording on set also increased during this time, allowing for a seamless blend of dialogue, sound effects, and environmental sounds. This period also saw the beginning of experimental use of non-diegetic sounds to show the characters' internal states or thematic elements of the story. This time is characterized by a creative renaissance, where directors gained almost complete control over their own projects. This period not only introduced the audience to stereo and multi-channel sound systems in theaters, but also saw a leap in the sophistication of sound effects, which gave way to films like Taxi Driver and The Godfather. The introduction of advanced sound technologies allowed filmmakers to experiment with audio in ways that weren't possible, making sound design an increasingly vital part of the cinematic art form. Personally, I've always felt like out of the core qualities that make up a film, that sound is left out of the conversation, and is looked at the least when talking about films. So I looked at the top critic pages on Rotten Tomatoes on 3 films ranging in sound design quality, from bad to good, to see how often critics would mention the sound design in the film. So Baby Driver was my example of a film that has exceptional sound design, and that does show with sound being talked about 48% of the time. Which makes sense because of how sound is treated in Baby Driver, the soundtrack being an incredibly important aspect of Baby Driver. But if we look at the others, we see that critics who mention sound were few and far between. If I take all 3 charts and put them together, sound would only make up 20.2%, with visuals making up 35.7%, story making up 27.3%, and acting making 16.8% of the reviews. I thought that acting would be talked about more, but it will vary from film to film. But visuals were consistently good in each chart, and aside from the one film where sound is a major theme, sound did very poorly. So to get to the bottom of why, I asked Reddit and the people I know what they thought about sound in film and how it's portrayed, with 75% of the people saying that they did pay attention to the sound design in the films they watch. And when it came to the genre of film, 35% of the people who answered said that horror films had the best use of sound design, which makes a lot of sense since horror films rely on the atmosphere, and that relies on all your senses being immersed. So effective sound design is key when making a successful horror film. To be honest, although despite 75% of people saying they did take notice of sound design in film, 80% believe that sound design is still underappreciated, which calls the reason why sound design is underappreciated into question. And when I asked why sound design is underappreciated, a few people said that it's because most people are too focused on the visuals, or that there's still a lot of people that overlook sound design. I then asked what films have the best sound design. So it's pretty interesting to see what films everyone who did the film thought had the best sound, which to be honest, I did for fun because I wanted to see what films everyone would come up with, but it also helps me pin down what actually makes for good sound design, which was my next question. And I would say the most common response to make good sound design is when it could make you feel what the film wants you to feel, which makes sense, because sound in film is supposed to make you feel immersed. After looking through all these responses, I think I can come to a conclusion on why sound design is generally not talked about as much as, say, visuals or story. And I think that is because it's mostly meant for immersion and connecting to people's feelings, which making them feel as if they're experiencing what the characters would feel. And from my own experiences, the more I think about the sounds I film, the less immersed I feel. So, I think sound works like the lighting technician in a play, where you know that they are controlling the lights to keep you focused on the characters, and you may see them from time to time and take note of them, but they're not really meant to be the main focus, and are there to aid what you are seeing and keep your focus on the main character. Well, at least, that is what I've taken away from these results, and the findings online. I do think it is important to acknowledge the quality of sound in films, and if you ever feel like rewatching something, you should really try to take a step back and focus more on what you are hearing, and hey, you may grow a new appreciation for what you're watching. So, I think the best way to go about this segment would be look at a clip from each film that shows the good, the bad, and the average of sound design, so I can give the clearest example of what I think. So, I want to clarify that Megamind is my second favorite DreamWorks movie, behind Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, because that's a masterpiece. But Megamind isn't really well known for the sound design, which I showed earlier. So, that is why I wanted to include it here, because I'll take any excuse to talk a bit about Megamind. Honestly, I could mention a lot of scenes, because I just want to talk about the standard sound design, but the scene I want to talk about is the bus kicking scene, because of the Deltarune meme. So when looking over the scene with and without sound, it's clear that everything feels a lot less weighty and has a lot less impact, and all the emotional beats and twists and turns don't hit nearly the same without music aiding it, which I think shows that sound design should generally aid the visuals, which is what I mentioned before as well, and that is how most films treat sound, which is fair because film is generally seen as a visual art form. I do like the sound effects. Everything sounds nice and punchy and it adds a nice layer of superhero action, especially with the quad flex and also the shockwave when Titan speeds up. Plus the sound of the bus are all standout moments to me that really aid in showing how powerful Titan is and how powerful Metro Man is. Even though this isn't really Metro Man, in general everything feels crisp and clear, which is the general standard the films try to achieve. When I first watched Interstellar, I didn't take much notice of the sound and how bad it was, but when researching for this video, I saw that Interstellar is considered one of the worst films when it comes to sound design that I still liked, because otherwise I could use like Plan 9 from Outer Space or something, which honestly I would have recommended because it's pretty funny. But anyways, the scene I want to focus on for Interstellar is when Cooper watches the messages from his kids. And I don't have too much to say. The sound feels less clear and the music feels like it's clashing in the dialogue, and when characters mumble sometimes, and not a lot of emphasis is given to the sounds that moving makes. I do think the emotional impact of the scene is aided well by the music, but the actual quality of the sound isn't very good. Without any sound, the scene definitely loses some emotional impact, but the visuals do most of the work in showing how the characters are feeling. Finally, I want to talk about Baby Driver, because of how integral sound is to this film, to the point where watching it without sound removes most of its identity, which is what separates it from most films like Megamind, where instead of the sound existing to aid the visuals, it is truly integral to the plot of the film, which makes the sound design that much more impactful. And I think the best way to do that is to make all the sounds in your film diegetic, which means that it takes place in the film itself, and doesn't exist for the audience to be amused by, and instead of making the sound lend to the film's whim, the film must now bend to the sound's whim in order to keep character consistency, and to make having the music exist within the film itself justified to the audience. I find this makes action flow a lot more smoothly. The scene I want to talk about is the first getaway scene, since I love it when an action sequence revolves around the music that is playing. In this scene, Bell Bombs by John Spencer Blues Explosion is played, and it plays from start to finish with no other songs and no beats skipped throughout the whole scene. So the action needs to be built around the music, and it is shown to great effect, timing the cuts to the drops in songs and the paces depending on the pace of the song, making the sound feel much more involved in the story than a normal film. Also, this may be because I was paying more attention on the sound. I felt like the footsteps and car noises, like the screeching and engine, were accentuated to make them stand out more. Both aspects are the reason why so many critics made sound design the focus for their review on Baby Driver. After watching the same scene but with no sound, the first part looks silly, and the action is hard to follow. I felt as if my enjoyment of the scene was severely impacted by the lack of sound when compared to Megamind or Interstellar. So yeah, I think I have defined how sound design is used in film, or at least what I have found from doing research, and how it is done poorly, and how it can be elevated to the next level. If you want sound to be more prominent in a movie, now of course I can't claim everything I've said is perfect, since people are going to be biased towards themselves on how much they pay attention to sound in film, and I can't possibly show every way sound can be done well, and how it is used poorly in a video this short. I can just give an example of how I think it's done. With that being said, I hope anyone who is watching this enjoyed the video, and feedback would be nice. Bye!